Okay, so it's been a while since I've done a little live stream. A lot is happening now. I could be watching the Italy Wales game in the Six Nations, but I think events on social media this week and then by the BBC have escalated to a point where there's a lot to talk about. Now, I've done a video on the subject surrounding Gary Lineker and his views on the British government's various policies that they have, and he's been highly critical. The BBC response, previous incidents in the past where a journalist has been outspoken or an instance happened, and how different broadcasters have dealt with it. I've covered that in the video, and it's very interesting. And wow, this is blown up massively, Gary Lineker, massively. It's also snowballed much further than I think anyone realised at the beginning. We now know that meetings were held between the Director General of the BBC and Gary Lineker in regards to his social media use in the days leading up to what he posted in regards to the government's immigration policy. We are aware that the BBC don't want to sack Gary Lineker. Now, technically, he is a freelancer, so he's not directly employed by the BBC. He is employed by the BBC, but not directly. I mean, if he was to work for another broadcaster and be high profile in the sense that was his main source of income, which the BBC is, I think the reaction would have been different. It's because of the public nature of the BBC and the BBC's funding model that they've acted in the way they have. The fact that basically the whole of BBC Sports broadcasting team, not just football, has basically decided to down tools is very, very interesting. And obviously, coming up, we've got the Six Nations this weekend. We've got the FA Cup quarter-finals next weekend, of which the BBC is contractually obliged, as it's a live broadcast. Um, with the rights. So if they fail to broadcast, they are in breach of their contractual obligations. Now the difference is Football Focus and Match of the Day are highlights and discussion panel programs, so they don't necessarily have to go out on their output. It's part of the internal BBC scheduling. But when they have a live sporting event, this is going to be interesting. This will be interesting. The radio commentary not being going ahead apart from the 3 o'clock kickoff, which is the Leeds Brighton game, is the only five live radio commentary. So like a rival broadcaster like Talksport on the radio, for example, will be rubbing their hands with glee at this in regards to, well, we might get more listeners. Rival TV broadcasters may go, we can get more viewers. The problem is the BBC also grants the operating licenses in part, has a say in, let's say Sky Sports having its operating license. So while they might be rubbing their hands at glee, going, "Oh, rival broadcasters struggling," it's different. The fact that it has blown up the way it has. Now, I will cover other sports and we can discuss other topics, but the way it's blown up as quickly as it has and as rapidly as it has is stunning. I and I will draw parallels with other broadcasters who've fallen afoul of saying things or doing things, and the reaction of their colleagues is really important. So when Dan Rowan made his comments, I think about 5 years ago now, following the Leicester City helicopter crash, there wasn't a load of people coming out in support of Dan Rowan, the BBC Sports journalist. It wasn't a load. In fact, a lot of people thought he was a bit of a dipshit, me included. Now, if I was to make that video again, I would do it differently. I would still hold the same personal views that I think he should be sacked, should be suspended, that kind of thing. And I'm not a fan of Dan Rowan. The way I covered that all those years ago, I watched the video again and I am horrified with just how reactionary and knee jerky I was to it. But it's the most popular video on the channel. And for good reason. I was controversial in the controversy. So there you go. Note, controversy does create interest. But the way the BBC handled that was less severe than how they're handling Gary Lineker right now. Then we go back in time, rewind a bit further, and we have Don Cherry on Coach's Corner was roughly at the same time in Canada. So if you're a Canadian and you like the NHL, obviously you'll notice Don Cherry is no longer on your TV screen. And he made some off the cuff. Well, he made some comments. I would liken them similar to what Dan Rowan did and he was promptly fired. He was gone. Contract terminated. Gone. He was going to retire anyway at some point within the time frame, but he was gone. Sportsnet were like, no, bye bye. Wash their hands of him. You're out the door. You're gone. And there wasn't, from what I gather over this side of the Atlantic, there wasn't the outpouring of support from fellow broadcasters within Sportsnet for Don Cherry, in the sense that we're not going to broadcast, we're not going to where we're going to boycott presenting, we're going to go on strike basically in solidarity. There didn't seem to be that with Don Cherry. Ron Atkinson, for his comments, which were, well, flat out racist and openly, he got sacked on the spot pretty much, and hasn't been back in broadcasting since. Obviously, obviously the Jamie Carragher incident that got brought up at the time that I did the Dan Rowan video. He was rightly suspended, and people still bring that incident up because he's more high profile than Dan Rowan, I think. Just enjoying my cup of Bovril, by the way. Yes, Bovril, it's a thing. It's good. Young people don't know what Bovril is. Old people, cup of Bovril. It's good for you. Ugh. Delicious. Now, any thoughts on Super League IMG? I don't know enough about that in my and for me, giving a view on it would be wrong. Let me just have a look. In what, because we've got more than one Super League in the world. Let's be clear here. We've obviously got the Super League in rugby league, and we have the proposed European Super League in football, or association of football or soccer. All right, and the fact that if we're talking about rugby league, I don't know enough about what's happening with the Super League and IMG. I follow the NRL if it comes to club level. Rugby league, really. Yes, St Helens beat Penrith, and there's mitigating circumstances with that. I think they prepare better, they play the conditions better. In regards to the Super League here in the UK and France, it's got a lot of problems. It has done for quite some time. There's money issues. Not enough clubs are profitable. The quality of the game is less now than what it was 25, 30 years ago. The TV deal is not good enough. And yes, I feel that the Channel 4 broadcast deal is a good way of looking at it in the sense of free-to-air coverage. Look, we operate with a system of promotion relegation. If they do that, I think they harm the game more. I really do. There are some great talented players playing in the Championship that won't necessarily have that development path. I'm not the Australian system where you have the regional grades, the regional competitions, and then the first grade and SG Ball and Jersey Flag and things like that. The Australian system works because of their population size, the rural nature of large tracts, that kind of thing. The issue with rugby league in this country, and rugby union is finding as well, is the sports media in the UK is too geared towards football, and the corporate money is too geared towards football, and it has been since the early 90s with the setting up of the Premier League. Rugby league's equivalent was the setting up of the Super League, and rugby union is their response to sports like football and rugby league having more money and stealing the talent pool of young athletes was to go professional in 1995. Now, obviously, in regards to what they would like to do, if they can't get fans on board, you risk turning off more fans from the game. You risk a possible player exodus. Look what's happened with rugby union with ring fence in the Premiership. It hasn't solved the problems. The salary cap is less. And look what they're doing with rugby league in Australia. They're expanding the NRL. I think honestly, I don't know how I feel about it, but I think rugby league in this country is going backwards. And yes, St Helens beating Penrith in the World Club Challenge in Australia is a fantastic achievement, and St Helens are a very well-run team. But then you look at the differences in salary cap and how they what they can pay players, and with the fact that the NRL will be expanding to 18 teams at some point within the next couple of years, there could be a talent drain, literally a talent drain to Australia. Um, oh yeah, the Golf Channel comments. Look, Nick Faldo is a bit of a prat. Great golfer, great golf course designer, but an absolute prat, womanising prat as well. I've met him. I know particularly like him as an individual. I don't know enough about Kelly Tillman to make a comment in that regard. But look, we are going. And then you look at what's happened with Tiger Woods at his recent golf competition he was playing at, the recent event where he outdrove another player and gave him a tampon, and then there's a whole sexist. Golf has a massive image problem. Um, Massive image problem, and it's not helping him. And then people dig up, they go back through the archives and they dig up these comments. But look, I think golf has got a problem. We know that. It's got an image problem. There's definitely massive struggles within the sport, and it doesn't help when high profile people, be it broadcasters or players, come out with comments like that. And that is a long time ago. A long time ago. Could the Dolphins in the NRL be as successful as quickly as the Vegas Golden Knights? Look, they're 2 for 2, which we've had a good start. I've been impressed with both performances. They looked a little bit off colour in the first half against Canberra, and when they came back, but Canberra can't play 80 minutes, it seems. The Dolphins, look, they got the right guy to coach them. But they didn't. But the thing is, some of the players, like the Bromwich brothers and Kafusi, obviously were targets that Wayne Bennett and his coaching setup wanted. They wanted senior veteran leadership in the dressing room, and they basically realised the Melbourne Storm were in cap hell and went, "We'll raid them for players." They've also got a lot of cap space for following years as well. So if they are successful this season or reasonably decent this season, they're not going to get the wooden spoon, not by a long shot. They won't get the wooden spoon, not by a country mile. If they have a decent first season and they've got to sustain this momentum, they've got to sustain how they're playing. They've got to keep winning, as more than they lose. If they make the top 8, that's even better. I think it would then vindicate the NRL by going to Redcliffe and saying we want to put the Dolphins as the 17th team, the 4th team in Queensland. It would vindicate the NRL, considering how the Gold Coast Titans haven't really hit their stride, and while Gold Coast have got a great talent pathway and youth development system, they haven't really been a successful franchise. It would definitely vindicate um, the NRL going for Redcliffe, because there were, people raising concerns. I think they've been brilliant so far. They faced I think against the Raiders, they faced more adversity than they did against the Roosters. They had to really come from behind to win that game. And in very difficult conditions as well. Very difficult conditions. But have the Golden Knights really been successful? I mean, yes, they got to a Stanley Cup final. Yes, they were conference champions. They've won their division a few times, but they actually haven't won the main prize yet. And they've gone through a lot of coaches at the Golden Knights. They haven't been, very stable on the coaching side, and they've had some player issues. And the way they've managed their salary cap is okay. You could argue the Seattle Kraken have been a much better run expansion team over their first couple of years, in the sense of first year, Vegas raised expectations too high. Seattle had a more realistic expansion year. This year they've been brilliant. They've made a few tweaks, a few little changes, and suddenly they're a very good side. Thoughts on the next NRL team? Um, well, look, as you'll see when I do my wooden spoon videos and some other NRL history videos, and I've looked at the Super League wars and I've looked at the the league in the past. Um, and I will be doing like the 2002 wooden spoon. I'll be doing every single wooden spoon season from '98 all the way through to last year. Now I've already done the Western Suburb Magpies in '98 and '99. The Newcastle Knights with their three in a row is going to be really interesting to look at. Um, what was striking out of that is the league contracted for a while and then got bigger. BBC have a chance to clear out the current sports employees or drop sports. Is 5 million. Um, oh, here we go. It depends how you manage your assets because there's tax avoidance and tax evasion. And if he's using a scheme which is an avoidance scheme, it's legal. Whether it's morally right is another thing. Um, Problem is, I actually like some of the sports presenting lineup they've got. I like Mark Chapman. I like Micah Richards as an up and coming new pundit. I've always had a time for Ian Wright because of his passion for the game. I think Jermaine Genius is slowly developing as a broadcaster. I like Dion Dublin. Um, I think the best pundit duo they had was Lawrenson and Alan Hansen. They were ex-Liverpool teammates. They used to play together. They played in the same era. I think since, especially Alan Hansen's left the broadcasting scene, he retired completely from all broadcasting um, duties. I do think the quality has dropped off, but we could argue that about every single broadcaster. To suggest he doesn't pay tax is out there. Um, but clear out. I mean, Christ, they could be facing a lot of litigation, and then I think the whole situation's been handled badly. I think I look at previous incidents, and I think there's various issues at play here. If this was Sky Sports or BT Sport or another broadcaster, I don't think we have the same reaction from the board members and the hierarchy. It's because it's publicly funded, and that is a different debate altogether. And I look back at previous incidents and how the BBC and other broadcasters have dealt with them, and there's been a wave of inconsistency across broadcast media. Um, Wave of inconsistency, and and again, see, I've only been going for 17 minutes. Well, it's 2 a.m. in Australia. I don't blame you for feeling a little bit tired. It's what just gone past 3 o'clock here in the afternoon in the UK. Um, but no, I think the situation with what's happening with the BBC and the situation that's snowballed. When I look at previous incidents in sports journalism, where like 2008, I didn't hear, you know, the world has changed, but at the same time, when I look at previous incidents like the Dan Rowan situation, there weren't a lot of people coming out in support of Dan Rowan when he made his Leicester City comments. Um, there weren't a lot. There was no one coming out in support of Ron Atkinson when he got sacked from Sky. Um, and Andy Gray, there wasn't a lot of support for him, which gives you a tale on the character of the individual, what he's like to work with or work for. Um, Don Cherry on Hockey Night in Canada, but no, there clearly wasn't the same feeling from his colleagues in regards to what the BBC Sport team are doing. Um, Yeah, but that's the Guardian. I don't read the Guardian. In fact, I don't read most newspapers because they're predominantly right or left wing rags, and 75 to 80% of what's printed in print media is like BS anyway. You get taught that at sixth form college if you do media studies. You're taught that between 60 and 80% of what you read in a newspaper is made up. If it's an opinion piece, I don't think it is, because the guy in charge of the BBC is a friend of Boris Johnson. There are multiple Conservative MPs that want to completely defund the BBC, and I have my views on how I think the BBC should be run and what the licence fee is all about. I have my views on that. I do think the BBC should go to a full commercial station like ITV. I think it's the only way it's going to survive, personally. Um, but again, that's becoming a political debate because of the public funding model for the BBC. But I wouldn't read The Guardian. They can't even spell. That's something else you learn immediately. The Guardian can't spell. The problem is I think, yeah, well, that's the BBC's fault. The way they've handled the whole situation for a good 7, 8 years. Now, we can disagree on politics. We can disagree on politics, and we can disagree on a lot of things. We can disagree on how sports are run. We can disagree on managerial appointments, on player selection, on a variety of issues. It's called debate. Problem is the BBC state you've got to be impartial. At the same time, I look at their previous track record in disciplining breaches of variety of it. So I go back to the Dan Rowan situation, which I feel is more severe than what Gary Lineker tweeted. Gary Lineker, bit of a bonehead in that regard. It's controversial what the government are trying to do. Again, I'm trying to keep the politics. Well, it depends on what, especially when it comes to social media usage, bringing the company into disrepute. Um, I remember when I was working at a law firm many years ago, in the infancy of the channel, I thought it was best to declare that these are my social media accounts. This is what I post. This is the content I discuss. Because a friend of mine used to work for the same firm. Now, she declared she had a second job. She declared she was a model, which technically she is. Adult modeling and only this is like the infancy of OnlyFans, but that's basically what she did as a second job. It was all legitimate. She paid her tax, and she declared, "I have a second job. This is my national insurance number. This is my tax code. This is what I do." The customers don't see me face to face. They wouldn't know it's me, but they were fine with it at first, and then someone obviously let slip what her actual other job was, which was is completely legitimate. Whether we agree on it or not is another thing. And she got fired. She got fired. So I felt that yes, I had to be clear with my social media usage, and including this channel, and I was. Now, it's when you're bringing your employer into disrepute. Technically, he's a freelancer, so he's also done work for BT Sport. He's done work for some of the American networks. Um, the BBC is his primary source of income. It's his main source of income, but he does after dinner speaking. He's worked on TV and radio for other broadcasters. I think the BBC are treading a very fine line here. Regardless of our views on the broadcaster, if Lineker was working for Sky Sports or BT Sport full time, or as his primary source of income, I think we're having a different debate. I really do, because they're commercial, and it will be up to the hierarchy of those organisations to make the decision. In the same sense as the BBC, because they've got to look at their bottom line, which is advertising revenue, and if it's a subscription channel like BT or Sky, reaction from their customers. In regards to the BBC, it's the public funded model, and a lot of the reaction is mixed. It is mixed, but the fact that other colleagues within the BBC Sport department are in support of him show the standing he has with them. Some of them are experienced broadcasters, others are very new to the job, like Micah Richards, for example. So I think the BBC and a lot of private companies are finding this out with the social media era. Doesn't matter if it's a broadcaster or if it's your bog standard 9 to 5 employer. there's been some high-profile cases where, yeah, but they see the bit that's where you're wrong. You see, the BBC is not technically taxpayer funded. It's license fee funded. You don't have to pay the license fee if you don't want to watch TV or listen to the radio. It's actually, so it's not a tax on everyone. That's it doesn't matter. They also make money off BBC Prime, which is selling stuff overseas. And since they sacked Jeremy Clarkson, May, and Hammond from Top Gear, well, Clarkson especially, their sales on BBC Prime have dropped. They've lost money on their commercial arm because of the change of the Top Gear lineup, which is their own fault. Um, in regards to the BBC, what Gary Lineker has actually tweeted is not the most controversial thing ever. Frank Boff getting caught with prostitutes and cocaine in the 80s and the 90s, I think, is more sackable than Gary Lineker disagreeing with the government's refugee policy. And I make reference of that in the video that I did. I think Ron Atkinson being racist, sackable offence. Dan Rowan basically making racial undertones and racial stereotypes about 5 dead people should have been sacked, wasn't. Don Cherry in Canada on Coach's Corner, similar to, I think, less serious than what Dan Rowan was caught doing at roughly the same time, got sacked. Now, I raised those incidents. I could have brought up Carragher. I could have brought up, others on Sky. But I thought these are the ones in my mind right at the time. But the license fee is a voluntary payment. You don't have to pay it. You can say, no, don't watch TV, don't listen to the radio, and be done with it. There's calls to make it a civil rather than criminal offence anyway, and less people are paying the licence fee. Our viewing habits have changed. And they've been changing for quite some time. In regards to how the BBC have reacted, I think they've got it wrong. I think I think they've misread how people feel. Again, if they're standing him down now, they should have treated it exactly the same if he felt that way. If he came out in support of the government, I think the debate would be the same. I think the BBC would have probably mishandled it. I think Gary Lineker would again, would have had his own problems. In regards to the social media side of it and the link between sport and social media, that's been an ongoing debate for a very, very long time. Is it good or bad for sport? Is it? And I'm finding now that social media is becoming more more divisive and more toxic than I think a lot of people thought it would be. I think I think I think I think we've become more polarized. I think we've become more polarized as a society. And I think the way the people who own the social media companies have allowed certain things to happen on their platforms, I don't think what I think he's worded his tweet badly. The one that's caused all this problem. But we know his view on a lot of things. He's centre left leaning. That's kind of obvious. And I think the way an echo chamber, not necessarily. I think social media for me, the only one that I find fun these days is YouTube. I think YouTube's come out of this recent period the best. I think Facebook and Twitter and their related other platforms that they own and other social media platforms, video sharing sites, have not dealt with the last 3 or 4 years very, very well. I think YouTube's had its controversies. I think it could have dealt with them better. I think it's learned. I think, yeah, it's impacted the growth of this channel and how the algorithm works, and there's still frustrations I find with the platform, in my opinion. Okay, so anyone who's got a bit of money who's slightly left leaning or centrist is a champagne socialist. Is that so? Okay, okay, fine. Do as I say, but not as I do. You can have that view. I don't know why I even allow you on the channel half the time, because all you do is you just dominate the feed, make statements that are borderline. Well, we've worked out that you hate Southgate, you hated Eddie Jones, you hate Gary Lineker. No, honestly, I think you're just here to aggravate me. I don't know why I keep you around. Maybe because it's kind of entertaining. I don't know. Because the thing is, and I will state this, what has now been reported, whether it's been verified or not, is there was a meeting about his social media usage. Now, in the days prior, him choosing to continue, that's on him. If that is the case, then why is he not suspended then? But then questions are raised about the BBC and how it's dealt with other presenters and other journalists under its employment, be it directly or freelancers, who've made far more controversial statements and have clearly breached the impartiality that's meant to be in place within the broadcaster because of its public funding model. And now we've got a situation where the BBC may not be able to fulfil some contractual obligations with the sports it has rights to broadcast, which then leads to litigation in a court, civil court, for breach of contract. Now, to me, the fact he's publicly got to disclose his salary, he has no choice in the matter. There's pressure on the BBC to make all its employees' salaries public, even the lowest paid, which I think is not necessarily the right way to go. So we know how much he earns from the BBC contract. What he earns from other work he does is not on the public record, but we know what he earns from the BBC contract he signed, which then puts pressure on the BBC because there's been a lot of controversies at the broadcaster over many years, not just in the BBC Sport arm, but across the broadcaster. Remember that. There's been clearly the last 48 hours, the situation is completely blown up out of all proportions and out of all control. Clearly, they were trying to limit the situation, limit the damage. I don't think they were fully engaging with the rest of their broadcasting team, the rest of Lineker's colleagues on the programs he's involved with, and they clearly weren't aware of the potential impacts from basically a staff boycott of working for them. This then feeds into the political narrative from the government benches of, well, we want to defund the BBC. There's about 80 or 90 Conservative members of Parliament that want to defund the BBC and make it fully commercial and fully privatised, which is not a majority, but it's enough to create problems for the government. It's enough to bring down the government should they decide to vote against the government policy if they don't get their way. This then feeds into your narrative, whereby that's God save England from the British. I would say God save England from you. That then feeds into your narrative of, and there are plenty of viewers on my channel who don't like the BBC, and that's fine. They've tuned out of BBC broadcasts, or they're not happy with the quality of and that is fine. That is constructive criticism. You go, right, this broadcaster is not good enough. The quality of what we're watching is not good enough, and that is completely fine and legitimate. However, I think the way, as I say, the way they've handled it and the situation, how it's snowballed, with now programs being pulled from air because they've got no one to present them and no one to be guests, panelists on, and the fact that the Six Nations, they've said Six Nations radio broadcasts at least will go ahead. Whatever happens to the TV broadcasts, we don't know. They've got the FA Cup quarterfinals next weekend, which they are contractually obliged to host two of them out of the four. Two go to ITV, two go to the BBC. They're contractually obliged to broadcast them. under the agreement they have signed with the FA and with the sponsors, which you believe is Emirates Airlines on board. They are contractually obliged to be the broadcaster of the broadcaster anymore to resolve the issue. That's something else. There are plenty of people who think he's done his time on Match of the Day and as BBC broadcaster, and maybe someone else should replace him. There are plenty of people who are not fans of a lot of the pundits on a variety of platforms. I know TalkSport gets regularly criticised. Sky Sports, BT Sport, a lot of broadcasters get regularly criticised for some of their lineup changes, the quality of presenting, the quality of the product. And what we now know about some of the other broadcasters, especially on sports rights, facing bankruptcy, going out of business, forced acquisitions, forced mergers to survive. BT Sport basically going to be changing name and rebranding with a new merger being bought out, being sold off by BT because it's losing money hand over fist. Sky Sports have been criticised. The COVID pandemic has changed the landscape of broadcasting. Our viewing habits were changing before the pandemic anyway. We now find that money's been misspent. Things have happened that shouldn't have happened. There's been a whole range of changes, not just in sports. The BBC's in a vulnerable position. It is a very vulnerable position. There's been a lot of criticism of apparently the BBC having a bias either for or against the government of the day. But I do hark back to previous incidents, Dan Rowan, Frank Boff, 2 decades apart. It's irrelevant. 2 decades. It's irrelevant. They dealt with them differently. Neither was technically fired or suspended. In Frank Boff's case, they just refused to renew his contract. So he went elsewhere for a brief stint, and the same thing happened again. And then he damaged his own reputation to the point where no other broadcaster on TV or radio wanted to hire him. Dan Rowan, he's not a very popular journalist, from what I gather. There's not a lot of people who like working with him, and he's not very popular with a lot of people in the sports world. Do I think viewing habits will change again? Quite possibly, yes. Quite possibly, yes. We may see a return to free-to-air coverage if people want to continue watching sport and watching television. I think streaming services are sort of at a crossroads. I've noticed my NRL subscription has gone up by £13 a year. It's gone up a lot. It was 130. It's now £143 a year, which is ridiculous. Not happy with it, but I'm going to keep paying the subscription fee because I like the content. I think our viewing habits will continue to evolve. I can see maybe more people want to see free-to-air coverage. The viewership has never been higher when you have international club sport on free-to-air TV, especially for the top leagues. The viewership figures back up the fact that it's the best way to reach an audience by far. When we look at subscriptions of Sky and BT, they've leveled off now. Sky, I think, has got as big as it's going to get, and then we're looking at all the cancellation, and now we're looking at the changes to Netflix, and then we look at the illegal streaming services, and VPNs, and IPTV, and the attempted crackdown by the authorities. It's not to go after, let's say organised crime. No, a lot of people are doing it because they're pissed off with Sky and BT and the prices they're charging. I think Viaplay have got a very, very reasonable monthly subscription fee. The former Premier Sports, I think they've got a very reasonable fee. I think the Viaplay model, I think, is going to be the way that we end up going in time. ITV have started to streamline their TV and streaming platform. I think pay-per-views are going to be a thing of the past. And I think subscription bundles, things like Sky and BT, will eventually not work because BT's lost money constantly since inception, and Sky is facing a massive structural reorganisation. since its acquisition by Comcast. Um, and then we're looking at the rise of and the stability of things like YouTube. YouTube is weathered its controversies. Whether I fully agree on how not all creators like myself are monetized yet, and how you get to that monetization is another thing. But I can see platforms like YouTube ultimately, alongside free to air commercial TV, um, still being around. I can see streaming services alongside a commercial broadcaster being a thing, and I can see I can also see possibly the end of subscription platforms where it's subscription only for TV. I think I use BT Sport as an example. They are hemorrhaging money. They've been been running at a loss consistently for for well forever. They've never made money. And I look back at the collapse of ITV Digital and the collapse of Setanta, and there are clearly massive problems um, within the broadcast landscape. Massive problems. I think old school cable is dying, but then you don't have those hideous satellite dishes and set up boxes. You just have cable. But I think that's died a death. We'll see what happens. I think it will evolve. Um, I think it will evolve, but I think some of the streaming services are about to go belly up as well. Um, some of the broadcasters have been less able to fully transition to the full-on streaming internet digital age. I think maybe we've gone a bit too far too fast. I think the pandemic and the lockdowns gave a false economy to things like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus and Paramount. I think there was a false economy created, which we're now figuring out. The economic landscape is going to have a massive part to play on our viewing habits as well. Um, and then we look at the funding models and advertiser revenue for you know channels is changing as well. Um, and I think the BBC will be a commercial broadcaster by the end of the decade. I honestly think that if, let's say, the Conservatives, for example, lose the next election, and it's a Labour-led government or a Liberal Democrat-led government, that might actually happen. It's a thing. I still think they're going to be faced with the same funding problems for the broadcaster, with further decline in the license fee. And I honestly think it will have to go fully commercial to survive. Would have to. There is. I don't think it can survive as is in the current media landscape. Um, with its funding model, not unless they radically adjust how the license fee is paid. Is how how the license fee is calculated. Because I think the BBC has been very slow to adapt. Very slow. I don't know how can it be. Well, I honestly think this will probably speed up the demise of the license fee and the direction the corporation takes. I can see it being completely privatised within the decade. Doesn't matter if you're a Labour supporter, Lib Dem supporter like I am, Conservative supporter, politically neutral. Um, I can see it going full commercially private like ITV by the end of the decade. Same with Channel 4. For all those saying, oh, we must protect it, we must protect it. Uh, I would say the only way the organisation is going to survive is to be fully privatised, and a lot of people who work for it are up in arms. But I think some of these people don't realise they can earn more money working for a private broadcast. But I think that's the only way that the BBC is going to survive. Um, Honestly, I think with what's happening right now and how it's blown up, this is unprecedented. Unprecedented. But the organisation has never really regained its credibility since the Savile allegations came out and other allegations against other members of staff at the BBC. I don't think it's ever regained its credibility, and that's led to an acceleration of people cancelling their TV license or refusing to pay outright. Um, yeah, Channel Four. Channel Four itself is part private, part um, license fee funded. Channel Four's been losing money as well for a long time. I think there was. I mean, I think there will still be a limit to how much bias. I mean, look, there's a couple of channels that were on air that aren't anymore. That were very, very openly biased. People just weren't watching them. But look, we've got ITV and Channel 5, and you can sort of see where the target audience of those networks, the Channel 5 and Channel and ITV networks, are. I think there's a reason why the US is the way it is, and it's to do with the Reagan administration. Um, and there was a deregulation of the media. The US media back in the day was actually very well respected in the 60s and 70s, and then Reagan comes along and the whole thing changes with Bush Senior as well. The late 80s, the media landscape completely changed in the US. Yeah, GB News is hilarious because it's that bad, and it's a place to ridicule Piers Morgan on social media. Which anyone who ridicules Piers Morgan gets a thumbs up in my book, even if I don't like him. The reason why that's come along, and you notice a lot of the people who are involved in GB News in its inception, ironically, used to work for the BBC. Let that sink in. Um, Newspapers themselves are declining in circulation. There's been a rise in websites, independent websites, especially sports media, discussing things that started off as fan blogs that have now become like The Athletic, for example, Barstool Sports. They were basically fan podcasts and fan blogs, and they've now become mainstream media um, in the last decade. Well, The Athletic's been around for a while, but you see what I'm getting at here. There's been a rise in you know, I wouldn't say fan fiction, but this was a movie or a TV series, fan fiction. There's been a rise in independent websites in regards to, um, especially sports journalism, that have really sprung up in the last decade, which I think is a positive if you think about it. Um, Look at the success of Arsenal Fan TV on YouTube and what it's meant for them. West Ham Fan TV as well. You look at some of the fan channels on YouTube and the success they've had, where they can now focus on that as their main source of income. It's fantastic. Um, but I will stress this: the sports media landscape has changed. COVID has accelerated that change. It's also highlighted some of the flaws with the media deals we have in place to broadcast rights to matches and leagues and competitions. I've never really been a fan of it. I mean, in Europe, there's more scope for that because clubs have lots of sports teams. Yes, they do, and it's also cheaper to be a sports fan in Europe. You'll find it's a lot cheaper to follow your team or your league or just to go and enjoy a match day experience. As a neutral, it is cheaper in Europe. It's cheaper in Australia as well to go for the fan experience in real terms. The UK has sort of become a mini America when it comes to following your sports team. It's become exceptionally expensive. And it's not just football, it's become exceptionally expensive. But then you look at Europe, it is so cheap. And partly because of their ownership models and their sponsorship models and their TV rights. You don't have to sell an organ to follow your team or the league you follow or the sport you follow on TV. The TV rights are a lot cheaper. They are much more acceptable prices. There's a lot more free to air coverage, enshrined in law as well. And there seems to be a much happier balance. Not one sport dominates the sports market like the Premier League and the Championship, for example. Here, there seems to be a better balance when it comes to sports rights. They cover a lot of the other sports, so a lot of the other sports get more of an exposure, and that's probably why some of our sports are struggling. Is like rugby league. We are one of the best nations at rugby league. We invented the bloody sport, and rugby league is really low down the pecking order for TV rights money and viewership. It shouldn't be. There's an opportunity to grow the sport in the Midlands and the south of England, and powers that be have clearly mishandled the Broncos for decades, but their TV rights deal is so bad. Bearing in mind the core player pool, fan base, most of the clubs come from some of the most deprived communities in the UK. So the fans don't have the money to pay for the Sky Sports subscription. It's a no-brainer to put it on a free-to-air broadcaster. It is a no-brainer to have the whole bloody Challenge Cup, Super League, Championship, League One, the whole lot, every game you can on a free-to-air broadcast. There's a women's volleyball game on YouTube today between Fenerbahce and Galatasaray. There was 17,000 watching. That's not bad viewership figures for volleyball, for Turkish volleyball. But again, you've got to look at what's happening in Turkey right now, and the earthquakes. In regards to boxing and the pay-per-view, I remember, I can't remember if it was one of the Anthony Joshua fights. Might have been one of the Eubank fights or Ben fights, but more people illegally streamed that fight and paid for the pay-per-view, which left the promoters, I think it was it Eddie Hearn. I think it left Eddie Hearn with a lot of egg on his face that more people were watching on IPTV than through the pay-per-view channels. And I think boxing as a sport has really scraping the barrel now. But no, I look at the situation. Oh yeah, look, sports fans on the continent. The culture is slightly different to here. There's still the promotion relegation system. There seems to be even more community involvement with the running of their sports teams, not less. The accessibility seems to be, there. But regardless, European fans seem to be more organised than North American fans when it comes to when they're unhappy with the way a team's being run or a league. They seem to protest better. In America, you're unhappy with the ownership. The owners will sell up the team or relocate the team. It's simple. It's far more of a vanity project for owners for sports teams because it's the franchise model. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, the way things have been going with as I say, sports broadcasting and the controversy surrounding the broadcasters demanding rebates for not being able to show games, the financial struggles certain sports have faced. It's quite visible. Yeah, North America. I still find atmospheres when I look at footage, atmospheres, especially in North America, have to be manufactured. But when it comes to collegiate sports, yes, college towns, yeah, they do support their collegiate teams. Doesn't matter if it's college football or ice hockey or basketball or Mad March, March Madness, baseball. Doesn't matter what the college sport is, they will support. Um, and but I do find the atmospheres are a little bit manufactured. Uh, they won't get the same kind of fan involvement that we do here. Scary one a couple months back about people being threatened for watching Premier League with fire sticks, but the matches we can't legally play to watch. Well, they apparently 4 people have been charged. Thousands have been given cease and desist notices. Apparently, according to sources, 500,000 people illegally stream sport in this country, which I don't know who's creating those figures, but they're miles off the mark. Miles off the mark. I've been illegally, I mean, I used to illegally watch years ago. I found multiple websites where I could find match replays or live feeds. Whoever's coming up with these figures is well off the mark. There's people at my work who are selling these chipped fire sticks. Like, this is not. I think this tells you all you need to know about the pushback against big corporation, big money. I understand that, yes, like it's there. But the unfortunately, the reaction from people in regards to the police operation to try and shut down the IPTV and those chip boxes and people has met with a lot of resistance. As in, the derision on social media is like, really? You've only actually charged 4 people who've got to appear in court and given out, I think, 500 cease and desist notices nationwide across the whole of the UK? And you claim only 500,000 people are. What planet are the authorities? But it does seem that um, there is resistance to big corporation. If it was more affordable, the market wouldn't be there. No, I think the market would be even stronger if it was more affordable because you would be trying to undercut your rival to get subscriptions. So, if I think one of the reasons why BT Sport has struggled is when Satanta went belly up, and the reason why Satanta struggled is Sky had already locked in those rights because of the collapse of ITV Digital. Now, it's an interesting one. I mean, BT, I think, have got their complete strategy all wrong. They have done from the start. It has been their rollout was a shambles. ITV Digital from the start really cocked up. Satanta overextended themselves. The reason why Sky's managed to get the dominance is partly the football rights way back in 1992, but also, and that was on the back of a very decent World Cup for England in 1990, which I think helped create further interest. Plus, Scotland was still qualifying for major tournaments regularly at the time. So that created a lot of interest in the new product. And economically, people's wages were actually going up at a faster rate than ever before. Even people on benefits could afford cable back in the early 90s, before the Sky boxes became a thing. You could get Sky on cable, get Sky Sports on cable. It didn't cost as much as you think. Now, in regards to Viaplay and TNT Sports, I think Viaplay are doing quite well. The amount of subscribers, the advertising campaign may have pushed. A lot of people are going, well, it's cheaper than Sky Sports and BT Sport. And they've got a lot of a mixed variety of sports available to watch. And it's cheaper, a lot cheaper. And you can do it all online. You don't actually have to be watching on the Premier Sports old channels on the subscription or free sports. You can watch it all online, which a lot of people want to do. And I look at the price they're charging, it's actually cheaper than my NRL subscription. It actually is per month. It is cheaper. I am tempted. Don't get me wrong, I am tempted when my pay rise comes through. TNT, yes, they have obviously secured the rights to a lot of sports in the US, the TNT brand, which is Ted Turner. But part of the partnership that's taking over BT Sport, Warner Brothers Discovery, is pulling out at the end of this month from sports rights in the US. They're losing too much money. So it does surprise me that they are willing to invest money in the European sports market when they basically said, we are not willing in the US to continue with sport. We're going to pull the plug on AT&T Sportsnet and Root Sports. So that's an interesting one. So we'll see what happens. I have my concerns about the future of well, what will become TNT, which is previously BT, which is currently BT Sport. Yes, it's been bought out from BT Control. I think BT have mishandled their TV arm dreadfully for a decade. It's cost them a lot of money. They've hemorrhaged money, hemorrhaged. And yeah, my phone bill, because I'm with EE, is going up at the end of the month. And my bill has gone up constantly to prop up BT Sport, and that is a massive problem. They had an opportunity to basically nick stuff from Sky Sports, viewers, subscribers, the whole lot. Personally, it should have been a free-to-air sports broadcaster. I think they would have destroyed Sky Sports. They could have made all their money off advertising at the time they came along, or they could have been a lot cheaper. Their subscription bundles are ridiculous. They didn't win the hearts and minds. They didn't entrap the viewers over. And then they hired Jake Humphrey and paid him stupid money to go over from BBC to BT Sport. One of the few good decisions BBC ever made was not renewing Jake Humphrey's contract and not paying him stupid money. Dreadful broadcaster. And some of the lineups they have on bit of football or rugby, they've got Austin Healey. I'd rather cut my ears off than listen to Austin Healey for more than 5 minutes. They've got some good pundits on there. Unfortunately, they've got all the dead weight that other broadcasters didn't want. And I also can see the decline in the quality of broadcasting. They've either dumbed it down or they've just hired really bad people. I think it's a mix of both. If England don't qualify for the next Euros, I don't think it actually damages the. I don't think it damages, because I remember what the viewership figures for the Brazil World Cup after England crashed out was still fantastic. Some of the best they've ever seen. You want to see the best players, regardless of who they play for. It's a World Cup. It doesn't matter, in my opinion. 94, the viewership figures actually were pretty good, regardless of the quality of the tournament. The 2008 Euros, pretty decent viewership figures because of the quality of the tournament. I don't think it hits them as bad as people think. I think I honestly don't. And apart from the last two World Cups, there hasn't been a lot of hope with the England team. 2018, I think we went in with no hope and actually did reasonably well on the results side of things where we finished. And the last World Cup, I think there was a lot of controversy surrounding the tournament anyway, and a lot of negativity. So viewership figures for the last World Cup were mixed. I don't think BT Sport needs this take up to go these times and needs to lie. No, I honestly think BT Sport's been a disaster from the get-go. It honestly has. It's been an absolute shambles from the get-go. It has cost the BT Group a lot of money. They're still a profitable group of companies, but it has cost. They've made less money than they should have, and the fact that they've been constantly propping up their TV arm, which has been hemorrhaging. If COVID hasn't have doesn't happen, we could debate the Brexit thing to death, depending on the trade deal we would have got, whatever. Then maybe BT Sport continues. It's going to be interesting, the TV rights, and because they have the Cricket Australia. But it's looking like the ECB was warming to the idea of going back to more free to air coverage. Yeah, look, Super League on Channel 4 and Sky Sports, Premiership Rugby on ITV and BT Sport. What is noticeable is both codes of rugby have got a subscription broadcaster doing the majority and a free to air broadcaster doing the occasional game. Both codes have financial problems. And it's interesting that the free to air broadcaster for Rugby League is in money issues, which is Channel 4, and its future is uncertain. And the subscription broadcaster for Rugby Union has an uncertain future with the pending takeover. So it's going to be interesting to see long term out of Rugby Union, Rugby League, which one's better off in 5 years' time. We've just had the Rugby League World Cup, which I thought was a decent tournament. Could have been better, could have been worse. Wasn't as good as the 2017 tournament. So we'll see. Yes. Actually, it was the day after England won the 2005 Ashes that the full agreement to put all cricket behind a paywall was signed. The damage that Sky Sports having a monopoly on the cricketing rights in this country has had over the last 22 years, I don't think is fully going to be undone. The 100 is not the solution to fix cricket's problems. Getting it on free-to-air TV is. It's a simple solution. The ECB, whoever came up with the 100 format was on crack, or was in a strip club, or some sleep-deprived alcoholic situation. I know that the funny stereotypes about an advertising executive. The 100 has been designed by an advertising executive, not a sports executive. That's basically it. Yeah, it was Trent Bridge. The Trent Bridge test had the highest ever viewership figures for cricket ever in this country. No, Test cricket, just cricket. Have just cricket. I don't care if it's just the Ashes. The Ashes has been flogged to death in the last 15, 20 years, which is every 2 years now. It's got no appeal for me anymore. It used to be every 5 years. And it used to be a 6-test series back in the day as well. So they've actually walked down and flogged the Ashes to death. It's not the product it was 20 years ago. But cricket at the governance level, not just the ECB, but the ICC, is weighted towards Australia, England, and predominantly India. The other nations and test playing, well, the West Indies is, multiple nations working together, but the other test playing teams are screwed by the ICC. Cricket Australia's got its problems. The ECB's got its problems, and the Board of Cricket Control India, the BCCI, is yeah. I was 15 when that Trent Bridge. I think that was the third test, was it? Was it the third? I think it was the third test because we lost the first one, drew the second, won the third. Third test. I remember it clear as day. The final test was over the fifth test. I believe Lords, Old Trafford, Trent Bridge, Headingley, the Oval. I believe that's the order we played them in. No, the Trent Bridge Test has got the highest viewership figures for cricket in this country ever. I think the viewership figures for the Trent Bridge Test are more than the population of Australia. And my neighbours upstairs have put their washing machine on, so this is going to be a fun stream now. And I now know why my connection's unstable on my internet. He's a baker, so he's baking something by doing some experimental cooking. When he puts his baking oven on, it interrupts my internet. So I figured that one out as well. The 100 is designed as cricket for people who don't like cricket. No, the 100 is designed for thick people, because whoever came up with the idea, it's the ECB getting desperate, and they've really fouled it up. Who are the commentators? Richie Benno, Jeffrey Boycott, Tony Gregg. Richie Benno, he's passed away. Tony Gregg, he's passed away. You had Jeffrey Boycott, can't stand him. Nasser Hussain had just retired, not long retired from England captaincy a few years prior. I think that was his first commentary gig. Oh God, that was a South African, not called Tony Gregg. There was another South African. Was it Pollock? Was it Pollock? I think it was. It John T. Rhodes? I can't remember. There were quite a few because it's a 5-day Test match, 5-test series. That's 25 days worth of cricket. That's quite an intense amount of cricket over a summer. Richie Benno was commentating. He was a legend. I love Richie Benno's commentary. Jonathan Agnew was another one. Aggers, he was fantastic. No, Jonathan Agnew was commentating back then. Mark Nicholas, he's been commentating for 20, 30 years. No, Aggers was commentating. Jonathan Agnew's been commentating for 30 years plus. I've grown up listening to Jonathan Agnew. That's their washing machine! So I might have. Yeah, that's the ceiling vibrator. That's how thin my ceilings are. If this was Switzerland, that is illegal for them to do that after 10 p.m. But it's England and it's 4:04. It is. I have to live like this 7 days a week. They're lovely people. It's just they know I haven't got work in the morning, so and I can't be mad at them for it's still the afternoon. They got to do their washing up and cleaning. So I'm not angry at them, but it is annoying that it happens. And I do think I'm just going to take that lampshade off. It is annoying though. But no, the cricket commentary back then, that it didn't matter England won or lost or Australia won or lost. It didn't matter. It was fantastically tense, strategic. It was the best of cricket. And the ECB saw money signs rather than potential long-term fans. They saw short-term financial gain. They lost a lot of those fans. They haven't gained them back. Yeah, we won the Cricket World Cup. We won that final, and the viewership figures were well below the Trent Bridge figures, well below. And as I say, cricket as a whole has lost a generation of fans. It has lost so many young people are disinterested now that they come up with the 100 format, which the ECB has stated will lose money. Then COVID happens. Now there's an economic downturn and higher inflation and cost of living crisis. It's not going to make a lot of money. If it's going to be David Gower. I mean, look, he was on Channel 4. I remember. So was Beefy, Ian Botham, and he went to Sky, I believe, because I've watched some cricket on Sky. I'm not going to lie, I have watched it. There was one Boxing Day I watched the England South Africa first day in Cape Town. Religious viewing in the Boxing Day test. David Gower is another one of those ex-players who are now working in the media, doesn't matter what sport, who are controversial and ruffle the feathers. Like Kevin Peterson. Kevin Peterson is always going to be ruffling feathers. He wasn't particularly well liked as a player, hence why he doesn't do a lot of media work, because no one wants to work with him. You will find in every sport there is that reporter, that commentator, that ex-player who's a pundit, who is controversial, who ruffles the feathers, not particularly well liked, knowledgeable, knows what they're on about, but Well, it's the ECB, so they don't really know what. But all the ECB, much like the FA, much like the RFU, much like the RFL, much like all the various British ice hockey federations that govern the game, don't get. It's a job for the suits, basically. So yeah, you might have played the game at some point or been involved in administration, but it's always I've got a mate who could be chairman of this club, or I've got a friend who could sit on this panel on the board, or that. There's not enough transparency, and it seems to be an old boys club, or in some cases, old girls club as well. The old reunion where well, it's not all just old men, but in sports governance. But it's a job for the boys, like you sort your mate out, kind of thing. Or when one stands down, another one who may not. Um, I do think that sports governance, I do think a lot of them are out of touch and don't fully understand the concept of the problems that all the sports are facing. Um, in regards to the trans athlete row that every sport's got to face right now, we I think there will be court litigation, rightly or wrongly, and I do think that they're probably the trans community is probably best served having um, their own league or own teams playing against each other in a safe space because they do face a lot of stigma and abuse in public discourse. But I think the way that a variety of sports have handled it, I think, so I've handled it with common sense. In the same regard, I'm not against trans athletes or trans sports fans. I think they should be able to play in their own category and feel comfortable. I think it does devalue women's sport and it makes a mockery out of men's sport. I do. Women's sport has had to face so many challenges to get to where it is now. And some of the men's sports have had to face financial hurdles and other scandals to get where they are now. But at the same time, that said, I say the ECB is better placed than the RFU going forward as well. Is it though? Is the ECB? Because cricket had to get an emergency loan from the government and it got a lot of money. And it's stating that its flagship policy, the 100, is going to lose money. So we, the taxpayer, have basically bailed out the ECB from going bust. Yet they've said their flagship policy, the 100, which they put so much of their own capital into, is losing money or may not make as much money as forecast. Which makes you wonder who at the ECB is signing off on these decisions, because if that was a private company or even a publicly owned industry like the railways used to be, for example, and you're getting government funding in part or in full, do you come up and say, look, we're going to roll out a new series, say railways? I know a lot about railway history. There's a reason why British Rail, or British Railways as it was once known, but British Rail basically had to become privatised. Its safety record was appalling and it was losing money. And they kept trying to roll out all these new rolling stock locomotives, carriages, and a lot of them didn't work properly. And that is a problem. In regards to the trans player who was fully grown bowling at kids, well, youth players, yeah, that shouldn't have happened. I think the club involved is going to have problems, and I think the ECB is going to have problems because they sanction the game. They're the governing body. They set out the rules of the sport in this country. Um, I do think um, I think a lot of sports are going to have to face, and I think that the trans community are going to have to fight their battle in court as well. And there's going to be litigation in court, which could have its own complications on the direction sports take. It will. It will have its own complications on the direction sports ultimately take. And down the line, that could have serious consequences um, for all concerned. It really will. And then we can debate the pros and cons of that. But no, sports governance is absolutely shambolic. That's my personal opinion. I'm just going to check the news headlines because we know that obviously with the Gary Lineker situation, we've all got a different viewpoint on it. The way I think the BBC's handled it's been poor. I think they didn't anticipate other journos. Right, so the BBC has now released a apology in the wake of limited sports broadcasters. Right, bright. Okay. Oh, here we go. Wales beat Italy 29 points to 17. So that's eased the pressure on Warren Gatland and the Welsh players. Uh, right, let's have a look at other sports news. Get down to it. Bournemouth have beaten Liverpool. Celtic have beaten Hearts to reach the Scottish Cup semi-finals. There's a lot going on. Right, let's have a look. So England have played France in the Six Nations and kicks off in what 20 minutes. So we will wind up this stream um, in a minute. What is interesting is it's on ITV. It's not on BBC. So that is really really interesting. Had that been on BBC, we might not even have a broadcast. And that is the problem that the BBC is now facing. They've had to issue an apology because they've had to pull programming because they haven't got the presenters to present. I think the BBC underestimated the reaction of its staff, basically, to the Lineker situation. It does show how well respected within the organisation Lineker is. Now, we can all agree or disagree on his views, his presenting style, his politics. But I do. Well, no, I don't think to say to someone like you can't have a social media account while you work for us. I think that would be dangerous territory because if if that was the case, I wouldn't be able to be on YouTube. If my employer stated I could not do this, which is a potential source of income. Now, I've been very open and transparent with five of my current and four previous employers, five previous employers, should I say, in regards to my YouTube. Now, only at one point was I making money off the platform. So let that you know let me make a point on that. But it's a very dangerous area. If you were going down the road saying you cannot have a Facebook, a Twitter, an Instagram, very dangerous area where you could say, well, no, well, he. I think the problem is if he's not working for the BBC, I don't think it's an issue. If he was solely working for BT Sport or Sky Sports or ITV, Channel 5, Channel 4, if he was working for any other. Well, Channel 4 is a grey area because it's partly funded by the licence fee, partly funded by advertising revenue. So it's got a mixed funding model. It's not fully commercial. But if he was working for any of the commercial free-to-air or subscription broadcasters, I don't think we have a problem. If anything, yeah, his wording of his latest tweet's a bit crap. Doesn't help his case. If he'd worded it saying, well, I'm not a fan of this policy, I think we're treading a dangerous path here, I think that's different. What he's actually criticising is not overly controversial. He hasn't come out and been overly controversial in that sense. But Dan Rowan, Ron Atkinson, Frank Bopp, I mean, Christ, he was caught with prostitutes and cocaine. Let that sink in. Just let that sink in, honestly. And he wasn't actually sacked. He sort of cancelled himself because he did it again, but he wasn't actually sacked. And that's back in the 80s and the 90s. God, if social media was around then, he would have been destroyed. He was allowed to retire in peace and be a kinky bastard behind closed doors. Let that sink in. He was into fetish stuff. He was into being whips and gags and dominatrixes and women wearing women's knickers and stuff. I'm not joking. That ultimately came out. But I do think that we have to be careful with what we post. Absolutely, there is freedom of speech, freedom of expression doesn't come without consequences. That is the key thing. There's inappropriate and then there's controversial or this. I know plenty of people who've had to sign a waiver limiting what they can post on social media. So I've got friends who've got to be careful with their social media content because they either work on a government contract or they work with highly classified, stuff and industries that have very strict security protocols. My mum has to be so careful with her social media usage. She barely uses it, but my mum has to be so straight edge. If I was to move back into my mum, she has to declare that I've moved back in because of her security clearance. And they would actually do a background check on all my socials and all my internet usage. And yeah, that's the thing. There is that in people's contracts, and I've got that from personal experience. I've found the best way is to declare that I do this. My manager knows. My managers know that I do this. I think a couple of them actually subscribe without telling me, but they know I do this. We have to be careful though telling people who are freelance contractors. That's what he is. He's not directly employed by the BBC. He's a freelancer. About what they can and cannot post, and that's where I think the BBC have overstepped the mark because he's not. He's a freelance journalist technically. He does content not only for the BBC but other broadcasters as well, and that's where I think the BBC's got this wrong. As I say, if Gary Lineker was working for ITV, I don't think we have a blow up like this. If he's working for Channel 5, we don't have a blow up like this. Channel 4, maybe. Sky, BT Sport, Viaplay, all the other broadcasters, an overseas broadcaster like NBC, CSN, CBC in the US, we don't have a blow up like this. Because of the public funding model of the BBC and the scrutiny the BBC's under, because it's the license fee. Same if it was Channel 4, I would have thought, because of the license fee, because of the pressure the organisation and the broadcast has been under for so long, because of all the scandals in the past. I think it's. No, I don't think it is. I think it's fact. I think if this was ITV, the ITV board and their head of talent would have dealt with it differently. I honestly do. I honestly do. But that's hypothetical. That's my opinion on it. In regards to dinner lady at daughter's school, it depends what the inappropriate content was, and how it was found out that she had posted inappropriate content, and had she been warned prior for maybe some of her views or some of the content prior. In his contract that he signed whilst working with the BBC, I think he has to be politically impartial. But again, his salary is for public discourse. His contract is not, because that is technically legal privilege. You don't have to disclose that. If he then chooses to publicly disclose his contract and his rights as an employee, as a contractor, that is different. But the fact that so many other presenters and pundits and panelists, basically sports journalists at the BBC, are basically technically basically wildcat strikes, really, in support of him, says to me that I think there's a feeling amongst the BBC Sport department, at least on the presenting side, and I think on the editorial side as well, that they're not happy with some of the policies the BBC has. Because, as I say, with Dan Rowan, there wasn't an outcry of support for Dan Rowan. I don't think he's particularly popular. Auditors, in what sense? What do I think of them? I've never had to deal with them, so I don't really know what to say on that. I've only had to deal with them once. I basically I had to give a stock check. I had to do stock check a couple of times in my warehouse and factory jobs for the auditors to then look at, double cross things, double check things. You see, if that's on a public thing like Facebook, if that's on like an open Christ, the gin lady was drunk and posted something sexual. Phew. Um, well, um, again, sometimes you have to disclose, depending. I mean, especially if you're working in an educational environment, you have to go through background checks, and that would be a concern because it's come up as a red flag. And during a background check, it's a sensitive job. It's like my mum, she's working with, she has security clearance because of Fujitsu being a tech firm. They don't want their rivals finding out. Plus, they got government contracts, and it's a security risk. Online auditors, they're on industrial sites filming on public land. It's public land. There's not a lot you can really do. If it's private land, I'm going to punch the bastard in the face. You're on my property. Sod off. If they're on public land where it's the roadway, there's not a lot you can really do. It's like Google Earth, Google Maps. There's not a lot you can really do. You could argue if they overstep a boundary where they're on your property, like it's grey area. I don't know. I don't really know what to say on that. But anyway, I'm going to call that a day because I've got to get ready for the France England game, which is really an interesting fixture now. I think France are trying to get their title hunt back on track. They've got to hope that Ireland lose to Scotland, which is plausible. French haven't looked as invincible as they were 12 months ago, and it's World Cup year. So maybe this is doing the French some good to have a wobble. I honestly believe the French having a wobble may do them good come the World Cup. I think Ireland possibly are peaking too soon. Yes, technically yes. I think the issues with Wales are still there. One win doesn't fix the problems. And there's still pressure on Warren Gatland. Don't do watch longs because that's a risk of copyright violations, and I don't have the setup for it. I do not have the setup for a watch long. I'd have to have a TV there or another monitor. I don't have the setup for it. But no, I'm going to watch the England France game, and then do a match review, and get back to you guys. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more content for you very soon.